redeemed from the hand of the foe, those he gathered from the lands from east and west, from north and south. Some wandered to desert wastelands, finding no way to a city where they could settle. They were hungry and thirsty, and their lives ebbed away. They cried out to the Lord in their trouble, and he delivered them from their distress. He led them by a straight way to a city where they could settle. Let them give thanks to the Lord for his unfailing love, for his wonderful deeds for men. For he satisfies the thirsty, fills the hungry with good things. Psalm 107 is a remarkable little psalm. And actually, occasionally on communion services over the next little bit, bring us to Psalm 107. Because it talks about various people who found themselves in trouble. God has rescued them. People brought in. God gathers the nations from all around the world, and he brings them together. But Psalm 107 has them brought in from all sorts of horrible places. And despite the fact that they're brought in from difficult moments, God redeems them. He buys them back. He purchases them. He pays a price to bring together people from all over the world into his kingdom. And truly, this psalm is a celebration of what God is capable of doing, and indeed what he is doing in hearts today. Travel in the desert. You know, if you're going to travel in the desert, you've got to be careful. We have a lot of deserts around us. But if you want to travel in a desert, you need to do a lot of planning. You need to have a lot of knowledge. What happens if you find yourself in the desert and the unplanned occurs? Of things beyond your knowledge happen. What if you are unable? I talked a few minutes ago about our trip coming up to Congo. This will be my second time in my life I've had the opportunity to go to Africa. The first time I went to Mali. And Mali is a desert country. Now Congo is not desert, it's jungle. But Mali, edge of the Sahara Desert. And when I had the opportunity to be there, we were right on the edge of the Sahara Desert, kind of on the southern edge of it. It was hot. It was dry. There was a lot of sand every day. Sand blowing everywhere. It was quite amazing to me. Nobody had carpets. Because sand would get into it real bad. Because every day concrete floors, and you had to sweep or mop up a couple of times a day, because if you didn't, even though they weren't actually in the desert itself, they were close enough that there was sand everywhere. So you go along and you'd be cleaning sand that would blow in through the course of the day. And it was so hot. And one of the things we really had to plan out was, you know, how much water we had to take along during the course of the day, how to look after ourselves if things went wrong with a vehicle or something like that. You had to make sure you had the proper clothing for the heat. On my last night in Mali, we didn't plan very well. I was supposed to fly home the next day, and the missionaries I was predominantly with flew home a couple of days before I did. I stayed with another missionary family, and the last night we decided that I was going to stay back in the house of this main missionary family that I was staying with. And it was a typical night. It cooled off wonderfully to 35 degrees Celsius that night. Keep in mind, I'm a Canadian. I don't do well in 35 degrees heat. And it was hot. I was starting to get used to it. But that night, I woke up in the night and I was just dying of thirst, and that's not unusual when it's 35 degrees Celsius at night. I did have a small little fan beside me. So I went to get a drink of water, and I came to realize, oh, everybody's gone already, and I'm just staying in this house. There's no water. I had forgotten to plan. And a friend of mine had asked that I bring some African Coke back. So I thought, okay, I'll go get some, I'll buy him some Coke. And actually, in retrospect, probably shouldn't have done it because it probably would have burst in my suitcase or something with the altitude change. But I realized, oh, I've got that Coke sitting there. I'm so thirsty, I gotta go drink it. So I went and got this warm Coke. Now, generally, warm Coke is not that pleasant. But I was so thirsty. I drank it. And you know what? It's not the most quenching thing, but I was so thirsty I needed it, and it actually felt good. When you're in the desert, you can find yourself in trouble real quick. The nearest we might have is going out into the bush, 30 below weather. You got to plan for it. You got to be ready. If you find yourself in the desert and you haven't planned well, you've created yourself a real problem. You blundered. You made a mistake. And some head off, and the only hope they have is that somebody is going to show them some grace. Because this passage is about those who wander where they should not go. They've headed off and they made a horrible mistake. And now they're lost. They have no provision. They have no hope. They have no city, according to this. No place of community. No shelter. They've gotten themselves into a horrible mess. They should have stayed home. There's a story of a painting from the early 1800s that was painted of a man playing chess with Satan. And the stakes in the game are the man's soul. And the way the painting is painted, they're one play away from the man losing the game to Satan. And he's looking down at the chessboard, and he suddenly realizes that he has gambled and he has lost everything. Because there is no play that he can make to get himself out of this mess. And there is panic on the man's face. Well, this picture was shown to one of the grand masters of chess in the 1900s, a man from New Orleans down in the States, a man by the name Paul Morphy. And Paul Morphy examined this painting and said, oh, but there's one thing he can do. It was a play that nobody else had ever come up with. Maybe one potential gambit that he can play to get out of his mess. And of course, it's a painting that this chess master's looking out to. The man never does come to have a good look on his face. But that's how it is with the Grand Master of life, God, who can look down and when we are in that hopeless situation, can see there is one more move. There is one more chance, and he gives us Jesus. He gives us that hope. Jesus talks in the New Testament about the story of a lost coin that a woman loses. I don't know about you, but if I lose a coin from Canada, I don't panic that much. I mean, the worst I'm going to lose is a toonie, and I don't like losing toonies, but we'll probably still eat the next day. This woman was not in such a case. And Jesus says that when she finds that lost coin, she has a grand celebration of joy because the lost has been found. A number of years ago, when my almost high school daughter over there was almost 2, it was a grand event. Zoe was pregnant with Tim, and it was time to move Jamie out of the crib and into a big girl bed. And feels funny saying that about her now, looking, she's in high school over there. Will be in high school in a couple of weeks. I got up the next morning, after her first night in the big girl bed. I looked into her bedroom. She wasn't on her bed. So I started looking at her, figured, oh, well, she woke up before we did. She's probably playing with her toys somewhere. And I went to where all her toys were. I couldn't find them. And down to where the TV was. Couldn't find them. Started to look around. My heart started to beat a little quicker. Finally went and woke up Zoe. We started to look around. We started to check doors. Well, the doors are all still locked. She couldn't have gotten out. Doesn't seem like anybody got in. Where could she be? And we started really searching. She's got to be in the house somewhere. Finally! I looked under the new bed. And right up against the wall, as far under the bed as she could get, there she was, sound asleep. Perfectly content and happy, unaware of all the panic the mom and dad were going under. She didn't even know she was lost. Had no clue. Had no clue. Those who are traveling through the desert places, the start might be discovering that you are indeed lost. To be lost in the desert is a dangerous place to be, but God is remarkable. In the story that followed the story of that lost coin, it was the story of the prodigal son. And he's lost in a desert place, and when he discovers that he is lost in a place of great thirst, in a place where there is no hope, he goes back to his father. And the most remarkable part of that story is that the father casually walks out to his son, reluctantly walks out to his son, walks out to his son with a little bit of concern because maybe his son's going to reject him again. He drops all his dignity. He takes off in a sprint. He grabs his son with all his might and holds on to him. When we find ourselves in a place where we're just wondering, can I get back? God responds in remarkable love. And according to Psalm 107, when we cry out in distress to God, he heads out directly to the desert to where we are lost. He comes to us and he leads us back, it says, to community. He settles us down. And our response to the compassion, to the grace of God is simply gratitude. Because he satisfies our thirst. He feeds our hunger. He does good for us. And so we come to this table where God has provided us a spiritual meal. And we recognize that indeed without this meal we have nothing. But that God has done everything to come to us, to provide for us when we are lost. Most of my elders are doing other